Hi, this is Philip from Custom Bus Conversions. Today we are in here gridding out this floor. What we've done, we've gone through and rust proofed it. And this is of course all up underneath our moisture barrier here. We did have some rust holes. We actually went through and put in sheet metal over the top. This is a small example. We've got a couple of other probably better examples over here. This is a pretty good size one. The hole was right about here. So we went ahead, it came from here all the way over to here, so we went a couple inches out on each side and actually formed it to wrap around the wheel well here. Definitely want to make sure you round your corners over, because then when you're coming in and you're putting your grid work in, you don't want to be slicing your hands up. So just as an FYI.
Pro tip is to round those corners up against the wheel well so you don't cut your fingers. Yay.
Just to save you a trip to the ER, because that sheet metal is definitely very sharp and it will cut you up pretty bad. From there, we go ahead and we lay down our moisture barrier. That's going to be this thin kind of almost like styrofoamish sort of stuff. It's supposed to lock out the moisture from the bottom and keep all your wood from rotting out. Now what we start off with is we go around the outer edges here, and what you'll need is an impact with a number 12 bit on it. You're going to need some number 12 tech screws, which are the self-drilling screws, 1.5 to 2 inches long. 1.5 inches is probably going to be better. What you want to do is come through and pre-drill them. Technically those screws will go through, but you'll end up going through a lot of screws, and those things are not cheap. So it's just easier to go through with an 1/8 inch drill bit. So that'd be the other tool that you need. Is you end up needing just a regular drill with an 1/8 inch drill bit, preferably with zinc coated. You'll go through, pre-drill your holes. What we start off with is on the outer edge here, on both sides. We'll lay our 1x3s down. We'll pre-drill our holes and get that set. And then from there, what we end up doing is we go to the very back of the bus and we'll find out what our center is. Mark your center point, and then from there we'll go ahead and we'll lay our 1x3s down. Make sure we keep them in the center or relatively close, within a 1/4 inch of the center all the way along. And then basically from there, you'll take this, which will come out to about 40 inches typically. And you'll go ahead and cut this in half and run another one down through here, because what you're looking for is to get 16 inches on center. The problem if you get too much bigger than that is that you'll have a problem with your floor flexing, and you'll get a lot of like squeakiness in the floor. So you want to keep it at 16 inches on center. Another thing with that too is that your plywood is going to come in 8 foot by 4 foot sections, and that breaks down to every 16 inches. So that way then you can come in with full sheets of plywood, get them, you cut in around your wheel wells and everything, you'll be able to set them in there, and you won't have to go through and shave off, a 1/2 inch here or a 1/4 inch there off your boards in order to make them sit on center on these studs. Because ideally what you want is you want each board to butt up right in the middle of this, so that way then your screws that you're running into the 1x3s to actually hold your subfloor down will both actually grab around the edges there, and then you won't have kind of this flappiness of the plywood.
Okay, so I have a question. So you're going to run your center board here first.
Yes.
All the way from the back of the bus
All the way up to the front.
to the front of the bus. Then you're going to run this board here and that board there.
That
so
is
all
correct.
your length boards are going to go first. So your outside edge, then your center,
Yep.
then
And then the center in between those on each side.
okay, so then the center between each one.
Yeah,
oh,
you'll
cool.
want to run your length boards just full lengths all the way along there, and then what you can do is you come along and you just take your measurements in between, and it's going to differ. It's going to be off by 1/4 inch, on each side. It's not an exact science, but it's not something that's going to hurt anything. You'll end up with pieces anywhere from about 18 3/8 inches to 18 3/4 inches.
Okay, so these pieces here, do you like just cut up like 10 or 15 of them at a time?
We'll go through and do about 3 or 4 of them at a time, just so that way you don't end up with a bunch of them that are too short. Because like I say, it's going to vary. The one thing with the 1x3 is that it's thin wood, so it does tend to warp. So you kind of have to play around with it a little bit. But like I say, you'll never get too far outside of about 1/4 inch in difference there. But yeah, we usually go about 3 or 4 at a time, and then you can go through another 3 or 4 of them, take the measurements, and just call them back and let your sawman go through and chop them off for you.
Okay, and one thing I want to say is I've learned from Jeff is that in a bus, things twist and bend, expand, contract,
Very much
and
so.
so that is the reason why a lot of times on these videos you will see that he will, even when he's doing the walls, he will measure every single board and cut them that way instead of just doing like, you know, 15 or 20.
Ultimately, you end up having to do that. Not so much with the with your boards that go in between your studs. A lot of times with those, I'll go through and do them in bulk. I'll do 20 or 30 of them at a time. And that's the reason why I do that is because it's always going to be 14.5 inches. If you can take those boards that go in between your studs and cut them at 14.5 inches on the dot, you'll always end up with that 16 on center with your studs. And the reasoning for that also is, well, mainly is so that way you don't have to spend all the time going through and shaving off little bits off of your full sheets of plywood. You can actually go in and start putting your walls in full sheets at a time, and everything will match up just perfectly where you get that board centering. The two boards will actually center up right in the center of your stud. I'm just kind of giving a visual on the with the floor grid here, but yeah, ultimately that's one thing that I will go through and cut in bulk is those sections that actually lay on the floor and up in the ceiling in between the in between your in between your studs. Sorry, I'm having a moment here.
That's all right.
But anyways, yeah, I'll do that because what'll happen there is if I can get a bunch of those laid out, then I can go ahead and I can actually bang those walls out a lot quicker because you don't have to go through and sit there with a tape measure in between every single one of them and measure that 16 inches on center because you already know you'll have that as long as you got those two studs butted up against that piece that's 14.5 inches long. It'll be 16 on center every time.
Cool. All right, guys, so this is different than what we had in the course. When we had in the course before, we didn't do the grid. What we have learned over a course of time is like what Philip said is there's warping, there's creaking and cracking, and if you're going to put down insulation. Now, if you're just going to put down the moisture barrier and straight sheets of plywood and no insulation, you don't have to grid.
Yeah, because you'll be able to screw into the floor or wherever. The main thing with this is you have to have these, you know, relatively close, like I say, within a quarter of an inch, because then otherwise what'll end up happening, and we actually had this happen on a previous bus where we got about 3/4 of the way up to the front of the bus, and our sheets of underlayment were actually coming up to the very edge, and so we were actually having to add more pieces to it. So it's just something that'll kind of save you some time if you can make sure you can get that 16 inches on center, because then you don't have all this extra cutting and kind of goofing around that you have to do in between in order to make things fit.
Yeah, and this will actually, it doesn't add that much depth to the floor. What are these boards, Philip?
I see here, the nominal size is 1 inch. They're actually closer to a 1/2 inch thick.
So it's adding about a 1/2 inch to your floor, but if you put down, and what Jeff's recommended before is to put down like plywood and then OSB as the type of insulation.
That's also possible.
If you do that and you can screw it right into the floor, you're good to go without the grid. But if you're going to put down insulation, and we don't currently have any in the bus, but it's in the course, if you're going to put that down, go with the grid floor. Your floor will last longer. It won't be as cold when you're walking on it in your bus. And you're just going to be much more satisfied with it. You'll see on the internet, everybody does it a different way, but I'm going to tell you here at Custom Bus Conversions, we have done it so many different ways on so many different buses, and this is the one that is holding up and lasting longer. So learn from my experience.
Well, another good thing about doing this too is that, you know, you actually end up getting all of the old subfloor out. Like on this bus, for instance, up here in the front, the worst part of all the rusting was actually, let's see, it was from about halfway up this wheel well all the way up to the front, which is why we have this massive piece of sheet metal here. And, you know, you can get into a bus, you know, go through here and build yourself, you know, a home out of it on the old subfloor, but then turn out, you know, you find out that you end up with a bunch of large rust holes underneath the bus, and all it's going to do is continue to rot that wood, and it's going to rot all your new wood as well. So it's worth it to be able to get all this up. Then you get the new sheet metal down, and the metal actually gets treated so that way the rust can at least stop where it is, and it can be fixed. So there's kind of another good point to having this sort of thing done.
Hi y'all, now you can see that the floor has the moisture barrier, the insulation, and has been gridded. So all of this is done, and this bus will be ready for the subfloor. If you notice, we do have the heater still in here. We're just waiting to hear back from the client to make sure she wants to remove them. You can remove your heaters before you do the floor, and that's what Jeff normally does. This time he just kind of got busy, and the guys got it done, so they just worked around it. It's just a little bit more cumbersome to do so, but it can be done. So anyway, here we are in the bus with the floor done.